Good morning, and thank you for joining today's program in Solidarity and in Strength, a webinar series launched by the Jewish Federation of Los Angeles to support Israel and the Jewish community during this historic crisis. In 2024, through monthly webinars, participants gained an insider's perspective on Israeli resilience, the recent surge in anti-Semitism, and firsthand accounts of those impacted by the war. I'm Joanna Mendelson, Senior Vice President of Community Engagement at the JFED LA. It is my honor to bring you today's webinar, Navigating the Campus Climate in a Post-October 7th Era. Universities across the United States have been accused of failing to protect Jewish students amid rising fears of anti-Semitism worldwide, as the Hamas war rages on. Today, we have a critical briefing to understand the current climate on campus, the role leadership must take to help shape a thriving ethos for Jews, and the actionable strategies to consider. We invite you to submit questions throughout today's broadcast using the webinar's Q&A function, and Rabbi Noah Farkas will direct them to today's panelists. Please welcome our moderator for today, Rabbi Noah Farkas. Rabbi Farkas serves as the Federation's president and CEO, named by the Ford as one of America's most inspiring rabbis. He has served for 13 years as a clergy member of Valley Beth Shalom, where he led successful innovations in synagogue life through social action, mental health, and next-generation spiritual initiatives. Rabbi Farkas is a proven civic leader in Southern California, and we are proud to have him at the helm of our Jewish Federation. Rabbi Noah, thank you for guiding today's conversation. Over to you.
Thanks, Joe, and welcome everyone to our next Solidarity and Strength webinar, a series since the war began of trying to understand every little piece of what's happening in the Jewish community in Israel and what federations are doing to support it. This morning's webinar is really focused on what's happening on campus, and it's really part of a larger strategy. What we know, according to Hillel International, there's already been 843 reported incidences of anti-Semitism over 168 campuses, including right here at home at UCLA, USC, Hillel 818, and Occidental College. 4 out of 5, 78% of Jewish students say that Hillel and Jewish spaces are more important than ever, and that Hillel is playing an absolute critical role. In November, we co-hosted a Western Region Summit on anti-Semitism in higher education in partnership with Hillel International and USC Hillel. Together, we convened over 100 university administrators from across 40 colleges and universities from the West Coast as a call to action to safeguard our Jewish students and sensitize them to our concerns. In addition, our federation revitalized our campus impact network to help support and unite Jewish college students across LA in collaboration with UCLA Hillel, USC Hillel, Hillel 818, as well as others, as we hosted the inaugural Empowering Students Israel Leadership Forum, where we convened 120 college students from across Southern California, aimed to equip them with the actionable strategies and the capabilities to confront anti-Semitism and to advocate for the Jewish people. I'm joined this morning by 3 very illustrious scholars, community leaders. I'm very happy to welcome them into this conversation as we focus the conversation not necessarily just on student impact, but what are the impact on professors, the university itself, community leaders, and how do we as Jews and Jewish leaders try to navigate some of the dilemmas that we face. This morning, we're joined by my friend, Rabbi David Wolpe. He's recognized again as one of the most influential rabbis in the world. He's currently a visiting scholar at Harvard Divinity School and a rabbinic fellow with the ADL. Rabbi Wolpe serves as the Max Webb Emeritus Rabbi right here at Sinai Temple in Los Angeles and is a senior advisor to the Maimonides Fund. He's a best-selling author of 8 books and numerous articles in leading newspapers and journals. Rabbi Wolpe, it's so great to have you with us. We're also joined by Julie Platt, who's the current board chair of the Jewish Federations of North America and a position she's held since June of 2022. She also serves as the vice chair of the Board of Trustees of her alma mater, University of Pennsylvania, and Penn Hillel's National Board of Governors. Julie has been actively involved in the Jewish philanthropy and communal leadership spaces for many years, including serving as chair of the Jewish Federation of Greater Los Angeles, her home federation right here in LA. We're also joined by the ever effervescent Dr. Sharon Nazarian, who is the president of the Nazarian Family Foundation with a regional office in Israel named the IMA Foundation. She's the founder of the Eunice and Soraya Nazarian Center for Israel Studies at UCLA. She's a chair of its advisory board. Its goal is to provide a systemic and academic study of Israel. And she also teaches as an adjunct professor at UCLA in Global Studies Department. Sharon also serves on the national board of the ADL and served as its previous senior vice president for international affairs. So Dr. Nazarian, it is always great to have you and your thoughts with us this morning. What I'd like to do to begin this conversation is to pose a dilemma, which is how much as a Jewish leader who are involved at various campuses, UCLA, Harvard, Penn, how do you see the dilemma of where to lean into those communities and where to push back against those communities as a Jew, as someone who cares about university life and university campus life? And so maybe Rabbi Wolpe, I'll just start with you. Talk a little bit about your now relatively storied experience at Harvard and just get us into that dilemma, into your thinking about the back and forth on the decision around the anti-Semitism committee that you've been a part of.
Thank you, Rabbi Farkas. It's wonderful to be with you and other friends on this Zoom. And I think that the decision has to be, in some ways, highly specific. So the reason that I left the anti-Semitism panel was, first of all, it's an advisory group, which meant it had no power. It could only advise things. And then if what you advised didn't happen, everybody saw you as accountable, but you actually had no ability to change anything. And it was confidential, so you had to keep quiet. And increasingly, as time went on, it was clear that what we were advising was not going to happen. And so I felt as though I was in some ways providing cover, as though I was approving of what was going on, and also that I was ineffective. I think that honestly, my decision to step down was validated because shortly after I stepped down, the advisory group was effectively disbanded, although there wasn't an official disbanding. It was more or less after the president's resignation, since it was her advisory group, it just disappeared. But the other part of it was that paradoxically, I found that my voice had increased once I stepped down. First of all, because I'm still speaking to what is now the newly constituted task force, and I talk to them often. And second, because I can now express myself much more freely about what I think the university ought to do as regards anti-Semitism. So if it increases the possibility that you have leverage, then I think it's a good thing to do. In other instances, working from within is what will actually help you make change, but it's a very individual decision.
Yeah, I can definitely understand that. I think many of us, I can speak for almost every Jew, many of us have to make a very personal decision as to whether you lean into a campus or pull back from that campus, and what are the ramifications from that. And there might be personal, social, economic ramifications. Julie, maybe you could pick up on that a little bit and tell us, you sit in two very interesting places at once, both as the chair of the International Jewish Federations of North America, one of the largest Jewish philanthropic networks in the world. And you also served for a minute as the chair of the board of Penn after the president stepped down and the chairman stepped down. So maybe help us understand that landscape a little better from your perspective, sitting in both of these places, and what dilemmas you faced and how are you navigating that?
Sure. So I'll start by saying I actually think it's a great opportunity. It's put me in a place where I received, during that period of time that I was the interim chair, and I can tell you a little bit about that, about 1,000 emails a day, half of which said, you're the worst Jew that we've ever had at Penn, and half said, don't go anywhere because you're the Jew we need in the moment. So many people make the decision to work from the outside. I always have made the decision to work from the inside, doubling down on Jewish life at Penn. And I think it has been effective for those of us who have chosen to do it that way. I think it was Ann Richards who said, if you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu for lunch. And I've sort of lived my life that way, of not walking away from the conflict, but moving in. We have a little different situation than what Rabbi Wolpe described at Harvard, because our anti-Semitism task force went right through from President McGill to interim President Larry Jameson, is a very public task force. He moved up its first deadline for deliverables from sometime after the first of the year to basically a week after he assumed the interim presidency, for some immediate deliverables, deadlines, goals. And I think we'll be a great champion for the things that matter to us. I'm very much confronted by conversations about safety and security on Penn's campus, and I'm sure people want to know about that. I think it will differ based on the student that you speak to. As a university, one of the first things that President McGill did in this crisis was take over the budget of Penn Hillel's security for the next 2 years, taking away the worry about actual safety, protecting Jewish spaces, and not just Hillel, but Chabad, Jewish sororities and fraternities, all the places that Jews gather. Unlike maybe what you see, Hillel is full and teeming with students. Our new chairman was there last night for dinner. His name is Ramanan Raghavendran, not a Jew, and said he was overwhelmed by the fact that it was full of Jews and non-Jews sitting together. But that doesn't mean that when there is a protest on our campus that's loud and with frightening feelings, that a student doesn't feel unsafe. I think that's very personal and how you experience it as a Jew. And I can tell you that Penn's doing everything we can to help students feel safe, including disciplinary actions on students and faculty that just aren't public because they can't be during a disciplinary action. So that's just a little bit about what it feels like in this moment. And to be a Jew, I'm very glad I'm in the position of vice chair while being the chair of Jewish Federations of North America.
Thank you for that. And we'll return to some of the student experiences in a couple of minutes. I think that's really important to understand sort of a student-centered approach to this. But I do want to kind of come back to that in a minute. Dr. Nazarian, you serve both as running a major foundation here in Los Angeles, creating a center at UCLA from that standpoint, but you're also a professor at UCLA. So I know that in many ways that there was an article in the Jewish Insider, right, called UCLA Professors Wake Up Call to Anti-Israel Hostility. So from your vantage point, both kind of insider and outsider again at UCLA, what's that core of that wake up call? What was that classroom experience like? And just help us get into that part of the deal.
Thanks, Rabbi Farkas, and thanks to the Federation for convening these very important conversations. My classroom experience came out of really my ADL work, and after stepping away after 5 years running ADL's global work on combating anti-Semitism, I really kind of reached a conclusion. I said, look, I have all these skills, I have all these tools. Let's kind of pilot a class and see how it lands in the classroom. And I also was very intent on not going to the usual suspects for students. I didn't place the class in Jewish studies or Israel studies. My thesis for the class essentially was that anti-Semitism needs to be understood through a global lens. Just like after SARS and COVID, we understood that viruses know no borders and boundaries. My thesis is the same as with anti-Semitism. We need to see it globally. So I actually placed the class in the Global Studies department. I was really thrilled that they allowed for this class to be, taught. I'm not a tenured professor, I'm a lecturer essentially coming in and out when I have classes to offer. And the classroom started on October 4th. That was my first lesson. And by the time October 7th, disaster happened, the shift in the classroom itself was just palpable. My students were very diverse, which is what I wanted, ethnically, racially, their background, their knowledge about kind of Israeli-Palestinian conflict, Jewish history, very diverse. And I presented the class to them on day one as really a pilot and as a mechanism of understanding how this content would land. And the thesis was literally going around the world, talking about, anti-Semitism today, not historical, today in Europe, in the UK, Latin America, Middle East, North Africa, and North America. And by the time Israel kind of entered Gaza in its defense of itself, the classroom environment became so shifted. And I essentially reached 5 conclusions that I'll share with your audience. First of all, students have far less understanding and knowledge of history and analytical skills than we imagine. We hear that, we talk about it, but I have to tell you, it was so disconcerting for me to see how little. For example, I asked students, I don't know if you all remember, but the Osama bin Laden letter went viral on TikTok with young people kind of putting videos saying, I read this Osama bin Laden letter and it kind of made sense. And now I understand better that, he didn't wake up one morning and say, I want to put, planes through these towers, but that he, his grievances were about our US policy of upholding authoritarian regimes and colonial structures. So these videos kind of went viral saying we kind of get Osama bin Laden. And I asked them, my students one day, I said, okay, for our generation, Osama bin Laden embodies evil. Who embodies evil for you? For us, it's like Hitler, it's Stalin, it's Mao, and it's Osama bin Laden. And the answers I got were, Trump and Reagan. So that baffled me. I couldn't understand how they're comparing, horrendous leaders who had been responsible for murder of millions or thousands of their own citizens and others being put in the same bucket with, President Reagan and Trump, who you may not agree with their policies, but they definitely were not responsible for murder of thousands or millions of citizens, of their own citizens and others. So this lack of history, lack of analytical skills was a problem. Second, really was very clear to me, is that they were not willing to hear theses that challenged theirs. There was so much dogma around what they are willing to agree and listen to, not even agree, actually, listen to, and what they weren't. So the notion of this class, which was essentially about Jewish victimhood, because what I did is go around the world, use case studies of really watershed anti-Semitic incidents in the UK, in Europe, like the Halle synagogue that was attacked on Yom Kippur 2 years ago, in Latin America, like the Amia bombing. And I talked about how Jews, citizens of different countries around the world, are attacked, targeted, physically accosted, and essentially vilified when things happen in the Middle East or other places. And so that binary idea of, yes, there is Palestinian victimhood, but also there is Jewish victimhood, could not be tolerated. And this was a real eye-opener for me that they couldn't hold those two together. And then finally, I would say that I felt that faculty, administration, they complained about me in the classroom saying they were worried about getting somehow the grades would be affected if they didn't regurgitate my thesis. It was unbelievable to me that I had administrators who say to me, we have to accommodate students, and students are under a lot of mental pressure, and COVID has been so hard, just try to accommodate. Some didn't want to come to my class anymore. And at best, I think administrators, as we've seen across the country, want to do well, but actually have missteps. And I would say at worst are bad actors. So many faculty today come into the classroom as activists and not as educators. And that's the challenge that we're all facing. I'll stop there, and I'm happy to delve in more if the conversation leads us there.
That's a great comment. And I was just reflecting on it. It's almost like you can be critical and have critical thinking when the critical thinking doesn't affect you personally. But when it affects you personally, it's suddenly that critical thinking is off. So this is kind of where I'd like to go with the conversation is when we think about frameworks, right? Some people say that the purpose of university is curiosity. Some people say it's about citizen improvement. And some people say it's about developing the frameworks for which people then go out into the world. And so when I think about the various frameworks of how, for example, what's known as DEI, or the framework of Israel-Palestine, or the framework of anti-Semitism, those frameworks aren't always line up nicely. And maybe Dr. Nazarian, I'd like to begin with you, but I really would like to have this discussion about thinking, if frameworks are coming to the end and we end up in this dogmatic black and white place, what are those frameworks? How do we shift those frameworks? Do you operate inside of a framework? Do you try to destroy a framework? So Dr. Nazarian, maybe just start with you, and then I really like to open it up to the other panelists.
Look, I think the framing for diversity, equity, and inclusion came out of this kind of cultural reckoning with structural injustices, structural racism. And the goal behind it, I think, was one that American society had to deal with. Just before we got on, Rabbi Wolpe and I were talking about the word equity, and I agree with him, equity versus equality. What I can tell you about the framing as it exists is essentially left Jews and Jewish students out. So there is very little diversity of thought in many spaces where DEI has kind of taken over, and that's a problem. Equity in itself has led to kind of less meritocracy and less equality. And I think inclusion, we all have reached the conclusion that inclusion has meant all but the Jews in many circumstances. I don't want to use a broad brushstroke. Of course, there are instances and situations on campuses, in the corporate space and others where it is not the case. But broadly speaking, we have come to the conclusion that Jews being framed as white Europeans are somehow then not seen as deserving of the DEI framing, and Jews like myself, as an Iranian American, Middle Eastern Jews, are just somehow kept out of this, and there's really an injustice to that framing. Look, I think, and Sarah Levin of Jimena, those of you familiar with the organization, Jews in Middle East and North Africa, has done a lot of good work on this issue. I agree with her in that we have to work within the system, and I agree with your contention that we have to just make sure that there's enough understanding and that there's enough relevance to the diversity of thought around what is diversity and what is inclusion and where Jews fit in it. And somehow until now, we've been kept out of it.
Julie, Rabbi Wolpe, do you have thoughts about this structural framework question, DEI or otherwise?
So I will just say that in how this plays out at my university's campus is the insinuation that there is a targeted effort to have less Jews at Penn. We've been accused of that many, many, many times, that the admissions office is actually targeting a smaller Jewish population. I think it's more where Sharon has led us in her description, which is, it is a noble cause to make sure that first-generation students and that socioeconomically challenged communities in our country have the right to an education. I'm not sure I agree with the meritocracy part, but I do agree very much that the initial goal of this was to give opportunity and to make our university student body reflect the student universe in North America. The fallout has been exactly as she described, that white Anglo-Saxon Protestants and white Jewish kids coming from all over North America end up being less a part of the student population than they were once before. There's a little bit of that on us. There is a little bit of understanding what a Jew is, what we look like, who we are, what a Jew of color is, what the percentage of Jews of color are in this country, that we are, somehow put into this nomenclature of the white oppressor must be corrected by us. But I do not believe that universities have any desire to target Jews into being less of the population, I think we're the fallout. We're not part of DEI. We are, in fact, excluded from that kind of inclusion. And that is something that we have to address and are trying to do.
Yeah. And Rabbi Wolpe, what are your thoughts as a thought leader in the international Jewish community about these frameworks?
So I essentially agree with what both Sharon and Julie said, in that the initial impetus behind such programs is to ensure that past serious inequities are remedied. I mean, when I went to Penn a long time ago, there were very, very few Asian students, very, very few Black students, very few students from other places around the world, and that gave a less rich college experience, and to enrich that is great. As we all know, the problem is not so much that you have a rich and diverse student body. That's a wonderful thing. It's how you teach them to get along with one another. That is, if you bring in a whole bunch of people, and we know this, by the way, from innumerable studies. If you bring in a whole bunch of people and you automatically say, these people are the ones who by default are right and the others are wrong, you're not going to have the possibility of a harmonious society or a harmonious campus. And so we are still in the growing pains of learning how to do this. And one thing that we understand is that we have done it badly, because what you've created on campus is the exact opposite of what you want. You've created increased division, increased grievance, a sense of victimization all across the board, a belief among those who are more gifted that their gifts have no outlet because they're always going to be shot down. A belief among those who are in the minority that people look at them askance because they don't believe they really belong here and they got here through special gifts. And so there are a number of programs from some very able thinkers and writers about different ways to create diversity and inclusion on campuses where people will come to understand each other as opposed to tribalize and ignore each other. And Jews have a tremendous, I think, investment in changing the current structure, because the current structure, for innumerable reasons, is inimical to Jewish interests and frankly prejudiced against Jewish interests.
Yeah, I just to pick up on that, Jewish identity is it doesn't fit into any category. It doesn't fit to faith, no faith, like many Christians or even our Muslim friends are. It doesn't fit into a single ethnicity. We don't fit into a single socioeconomic status. We're kind of inscrutable as an identity, but that's a good that we love that. Like, that's great, but it makes, anytime these frameworks come into play, we always get pushed to one side or the other. And so in many ways, it's the bridging of the frameworks, or the slight cracking, if you will, of the frameworks, and trying to figure out, is there some meta structure that could work here?
Let me just jump in to remind us all that Jews are pre-Western. So Western categories aren't going to fit us because we actually did not grow up in Western civilization. We predate Western civilization, and so does the kind of thing that we are. So there is no good Western word for us. We're just Jews.
Yeah, I think that's well put. So let's talk about, we know, for example, let's just lay out the complaints and then move on, because I really don't think that shift is constructive. Jews on campus, Jewish students on campus don't always feel safe. Jewish faculty on campus don't always feel safe. We know that many faculty members allow their personal politics to come into the classroom and try to shape students to the personal politics, even if it's doesn't or match the, like in the medical school, for example, you're trying to teach them anatomy and somehow you're bringing in these issues. And we know that at the same time, there is this counter conversation where Jewish identity is welling up. There's an awakening a bit, and that the majority of students on campus, this isn't their core issue. Their core issue is, where am I going to do? What am I going to learn? And how am I going to get a job when I come out of college? And so, I don't want to essentialize any of that. And I want to think about something constructive. And I guess one more complaint, because we have to complain about social media. Social media rewards essentialism and fanaticism and radicalization because it's more viral, I guess. So given all of that, and given the milieu that we're in, what are some constructive projects, programs, stories centering the experience on a campus that can draw people together, that draw us away from the essentialists, draw us away? And what is the work that we as a Jewish community need to do?
I'll start with one, just because I'm already doing it. With the Maimonides Fund, we're creating a Jewish diversity group for diversity of opinions inside Jewish organizations to teach people, partly through the work of Jonathan Haidt, who's done a lot of work on this, how to have civil conversations with one another. And I actually think that universities should be all over this, and that part of your initial training when you come in as a freshman to any university ought to be, how do you have civil conversations with someone whose views you absolutely anathematize and you think are bad and wrong? Because if you can't have those conversations at the best institutions of learning in the world, then how can you have them, at the local water cooler at your work?
So I couldn't agree more. That's very much something that's happening right now on my university campus, is the requirement that undergraduate students learn how to engage in civil discourse. And they don't know how. Even so much as to understand how to push back on someone in a civilized fashion. We don't know how to do that. You go to the extremes and scream. And that's what they're seeing modeled. And that's just not the way to do it. But you're asking about sort of proactive things to do. So I'm going to give you two. One that the Federation in LA is doing, and we're trying to do it nationally, which is to deal with social media. I know there's an initiative of the Federation in LA that looks to social influencers who aren't Jewish. There are a lot, we're all seeing some of these wonderful opportunities that are happening. 2024 New Voices is one of them, trying to get social media influencers, not the norm and not under the guise of the Jewish Federation of Greater Los Angeles, but out there speaking on our behalf, both from the Jewish and non-Jewish communities. I also think much more on the university level, we took our eye off the ball a little bit. And when someone tells me that they want to take their money and run, I actually say the opposite, which is fund the class in civil discourse, fund a new professorship in Jewish studies, fund a new professorship in Israel, Middle East conflict. Don't walk away, double down. And I actually think that on the personal level are things you can do. And in the most basic level, give to your Hillel. I don't care what university you're part of. The first check I wrote when all of this happened was to Penn Hillel, because the Hillels are thriving, just as you mentioned, Noah. Students want their Hillel to be accessible and easy. We're funding all kinds of free meals so that kids who can't afford to come into Hillel to eat can come for Shabbat, can come for Thursday night dinner. Fund meals, fund gatherings, fund conversations that engage in safe spaces for you to learn how to engage in civil discourse and for you to learn about the Middle East conflict so that you speak from knowledge, not from some kind of gut reaction that just puts you on the defensive.
Yeah, and I want to get back to that in a second. But
Rabbi Farkas, can I ask both our guests and you two a question about what she just said? Because I really want, this would be really helpful for me. Someone said to me, I would fund a position in Jewish studies at Harvard if I knew someone like you, that is a Zionist, would take it. But the problem is I can't determine who's going to be hired by the university because universities don't allow funders to decide. So if I fund that position, I might get somebody whose views I hate. So that's why I'm not funding a position in Jewish studies. So I'm curious, Sharon, since you've funded an institute.
Yeah, I
And
can
Julie,
tell you
since you
all about
mentioned it, I
that.
really want to know what you have to say about it.
I mean, I just want to go back one step and I'll come back to your question, David. Look, I mean, university campuses, we have to understand them better. 20 years ago, when my family and I came to UCLA, I said, we understand that there's a need for the systemic study of Israel, not from a advocacy position, but really understanding, scholarly understanding of Israel in its fullness. I, at that moment, 20 years ago, could not host and put the home of the center at the Center for Near Studies at UCLA. It was that hostile. So I had to make a decision, along with my academic partners at UCLA, that we have to put it in international studies and not Center for Near East Studies. So one structural problem, Noah, that you asked about, is what has happened to Middle East studies, Near Eastern studies, the Middle East Studies Association. I mean, there has been a systematic effort for 20, 30 years to completely delegitimize the study of Israel in those departments. So if a Jewish student or any student wants to take a class on Israeli-Palestinian conflict, guess what they're going to hear? They're only going to hear a very activist, and I'm generalizing, of course, but an activist agenda in the classroom that, at best ignores Israel or at worst, delegitimizes one. So when we established a center, and I knew, David, that I'm not going to be on the search committee for the director. I'm going to have very little role.
Right.
I put in the agreement with UCLA one specific line, that anyone that leads the center has to believe in a Jewish and democratic state of Israel. That was the language I put in there, and that's the only thing I can hold UCLA to. And thankfully, we've been lucky that we've had now 3 different directors, and right now we have Professor Dov Waxman, who are Zionists, who believe in the identity of Israel as Jewish and democratic. But I think the reckoning about Middle East studies as a whole is something we haven't really talked about. And MESA essentially has absolutely no credibility anymore. If you think of other academics and the way they view the Middle East Studies Association, the most venerable academic association on the Middle East, and that, serious Israeli scholars have no space there. And what then happens, it translates into the classroom. It's a real challenge. And we have to also talk about that and open up this Pandora's box that no one's really talked about. I avoided it, and I went to International Institute and put my center there. So as donors, Julie, I think you're exactly right. We have to come back to the table, not walk away from it. That's a big mistake. And we have to leverage our donor dollars and push universities to say, what's going on with your Middle East? Why is there no systematic study of Israel there? And why is there no anti-Semitism studies? And why are Jewish studies? Some departments couldn't even put out a statement on October 7th. That's where Jewish Studies has gone, and Jewish Studies Association, by the way. So we have to kind of look at some of these challenges that academia is facing today and talk about it openly.
Yeah, I since Rabbi Wolpe, you asked the question, I guess I'll try to also answer it. I agree with you and with Sharon and with Julie. I don't think it's just looking at a university as an island. I think one of the mistakes we've made is we look at, and funders have made, is that they look at universities as an archipelago of just these islands that aren't really interrelated with each other. And we should take a step back and really look at the system of academics and the system of Jewish academics specifically. And maybe it's not funding a chair at a university. Maybe it's something about supporting Zionist, pro-Jewish, pro-Zionist professors in their work and funding the research itself, funding sabbaticals, making sure that the people that we think for affecting campus culture are raised up to the level that they're raised up to. And I don't know how to do that, but that's just, when I think about it, I don't think it's just the classroom. I think you have to think about the entire ecosystem. And I guess I'll just want to add one other thing as we kind of move forward, is just thinking about, this is not just a fight against anti-Semitism. In many ways, we're fighting against disinformation itself. There's it almost seems like an organized effort around disinformation around the Israel issue. And maybe Sharon, you would like to go first and talk a little bit about your background and what you've seen, and then happy to talk about how do we fight that? How do we confront disinformation with truth and fact?
No, I was very intrigued that I think yesterday or the day before, former Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi came out with first of its kind information pointing to possible Russian support and influence of the pro-Palestinian protests we're seeing across America and maybe in Europe as well. I think that's a very important thesis for us to delve into and really understand where are these disinformation campaigns coming from. There are plenty of international bad actors, Russia being one, the Islamic Republic of Iran being obviously a second one, that are invested in, at best, I mean, if we just go broadly speaking, sowing division in American society. Their goal is to create as much havoc, as much division and divisiveness as they possibly can, because they benefit from it. I really believe that the challenge we're facing now is really about democracy versus illiberalism. And so much of, October 7th presents that again, and another opportunity by the Islamic Republic, by Russia, I would say China, to kind of galvanize whatever real organic reactions are into a way bigger crisis in our societies in a way that makes us all feel like, oh my God, where are we? What is happening to our country where things are actually not bad in our country, economically, politically speaking? So the Iranian regime, I can tell you, as ADL, we call it the #1 state sponsor of anti-Semitism, of Holocaust denial. They will continue to do this. They will find all kinds of targeted audiences in America. They will have influence campaigns. They do that. And students fall prey to a lot of that. I can tell you, I saw and I heard from my students some of those, disinformation taglines that they would bring. Like when we talked about, why is settler colonial language about Israel is anti-Semitic? And they said, one of them said to me, isn't it true that the US government and the Canadian government forced and pushed Jewish refugees from the Holocaust to go to Palestine to kind of replace the indigenous Arab population? I mean, this comes straight from TikTok, and my daughter saw it, and this is, entering our classroom, is entering kind of the social consciousness of a whole generation. And unless we tackle it and know where it's coming from and how it's working among our youth, we really have an uphill battle. I mean, that's the #1 fight, I think, is social media.
Julie or Rabbi Wolpe, do you have a comment on this one?
It's what I referred to a little bit earlier. But on a much more micro level, it's whose voices will they actually listen to? Whose voices will the student population actually listen to? And Noah, I think you recognize that. That's why you're trying to do what you're doing in Los Angeles and what we're trying to do nationally. The soundbite is so powerful, unfortunately, for exactly the generation that we're talking about. They listen to it in a TikTok video, in an Instagram post. That's a really hard way to grab onto your information. And if it comes from someone that's seen as such a biased voice, they're just not going to listen. So I think our only hope is that non-traditional voices trying to speak on our behalf. I just am going to answer a couple more things that we talked about earlier. I don't want to forget to say this in the what you can do on your college campus if you can't endow a chair or you can't fund the things, the very large thing we talked about. Help fund a trip to get some of these people to Israel. And I would particularly talk about at the faculty level. I see more and more universities doing that. That's an easier thing to do. A faculty member can feel like it's under the radar because some of them are afraid to do anything or call themselves out as Zionists. I just want to mention that. And the other thing is to empower those students that not to let anything go unreported in the classroom. They're afraid of that. There are ways to do it. It's happening a lot more than it used to, but I really want to empower parents to tell their students to take it on. You have to take it on. But back to the social media, I think it's going to take the different, more powerful voices that are not the traditional voices, that are who they see as the voices to be listened to, that are not always associated with our community.
David, I don't know if you have a quick comment on this.
No, I agree and sign on to all that. And I can talk about, there are a bunch of initiatives. I've spoken to people who've started to create algorithms for identifying TikTok denigrations of Israel and misinformation, but it's a huge battle, and it's not only obviously a battle about Israel. It's a larger societal battle, and with AI, it's just going to get more difficult. But what we should remember is that we have the same tools that everyone else does. So, yeah, the only other piece that I would add to this, which I know all of the panelists will agree with, is I see a lot of screaming on one side or on the other, and not so much listening. And very few people will change their minds if you aren't willing to listen to them. And so one of the things that I really think we need to do is to be able to do what Sharon was talking about in her class, which is to listen to the students, to understand why they feel the way they do, to ask 10 why questions for every one that we come back with a reason or an explanation. Because if you're only talking for victory, your chances of victory are very small.
Yeah, and I think I want to bring us back to where we began, kind of end where we began. Let's center the student experience here and think about, okay, we talked about what big funders can do, medium-sized funders can do. We at Federation are looking into helping sponsoring some faculty trips, Julie. So, I think I'm glad you brought that up. I guess is what can students do, especially if they don't feel equipped and they feel a little over their skis in this moment. What can students do to engage, to be an advocate if they need to be, or at the very least to be comfortable being uncomfortable? So, love your best wisdom on thinking about what students could do.
So I just want to say a couple things, Noah, and I have always meant to put this on the Federation, so I'm just going to add something to your to-do list. I think once you get to the college stage, it's too late. I think this has to happen in high school. I wish high school students went to college campuses better equipped to be in this conversation. And I think we do a great job, and as we're doing right now with this Campus Impact Network, but I think high school students really need to be equipped so they feel safer and they feel ready. I'm going to tell you something else I think Jewish students need to do: live joyful Judaism, be proud Jews. I think that speaks louder than almost anything. Be proudly Jewish. I know they feel afraid. We're protecting them. We are all over their security. I know many of you know about something called Live Secure. That's a national movement taken on by the Jewish Federations of North America to make sure everybody's physical safety is taken care of. We will make sure they are physically safe. And every university campus has doubled and tripled down on keeping them safe. I really think to live and be proudly Jewish is almost the best defense against what we feel and what we see and what we hear.
No, maybe I'll add 2 more points. First of all, look, in my classroom, I had Jewish students who wound up being broadly quiet. So we have to also be sensitive to our students, is that they are not, they don't have to be the fighters. They don't have to bear the burden of battling every battle, and give them permission to really keep to themselves in terms of what they engage on, what they don't. Second is about parents. And, many seniors are hearing now back from high school seniors from where they're going to get into in colleges that's coming back. A lot of parents are looking at which campus is safe and which is not. And I think that's a mistake. I think students have enough pressures on them and all the variables they have to contend with anyway in terms of where they want to go and where they want to apply. Adding the variable of, are you going to have this, is this a more anti-Semitic campus or less, shouldn't be the focal point. It should be about, and I agree with Julie, arming our Jewish high schoolers to feel confident enough about who they are, comfortable enough where they want to engage and where they don't want to engage, and not have that burden on them that you're going to go into a battleground and you have to be a leader and you have to do everything you have to do. and know that unfortunately, October 7th changed all our lives. I can tell you as an immigrant from a vulnerable community in Iran, and I remember, and all that is in my DNA about what it means to feel unsafe. American Jewry, definitely at Charlottesville, definitely at Pittsburgh Synagogue, and definitely at October 7th. We have lost that sense of security that was such a beautiful luxury of American Jewry. I can tell you that as SVP of, ADL, I would go around the world before Pittsburgh, I would say. And I say, here we are, safe American Jews coming to see how we can help you. After Pittsburgh, and definitely after October 7th, that narrative is gone. I have to go around the world and ask the Jewish communities of Europe, Latin America, how do we keep our Jewish communities? How do we learn from you? Because we are no longer, this beautifully safe and secure Jewish community. So students have to come to that realization, unfortunately. I had to say that to my children. My children are American born. They woke up on, October 8th, my older one said to me, Mom, I grew up hearing about anti-Semitism in Iran, about what you and Grandpa and others faced, but it was all intellectual. I heard it here. Now on October 8th, I feel it here. I feel it in my heart. And I know the fear and I understand it. So students, sadly, it breaks my heart to say that. I don't want that as a parent. But our high school students have to go to college understanding they might face some of that. Their Jewish identity has to be proud and secure. And I totally believe, I agree with Julie in that. But also the reality has shifted and we have to kind of be prepared for that and strengthen them so they're not fragile. I worry about the fragility of all students. And that's what I saw in my classroom. There's fragility. There's, they feel like they're going to break and anything that might push back against their viewpoints, but they won't. And we're strong and we're resilient. And look at our history as Jews. We've all survived so much, and this too shall pass, and we will be strong and secure again, I hope.
David, do you want to add a comment?
Yeah, I just want to add, I mean, the students are safe on campus. They are. People walk around Harvard, as I do, with a kippah all the time. Never had incidents. People almost never say something to them. What they don't have is what Sharon talked about. They don't have emotional security. That's true. They feel as though if you're a pro-Israel advocate on campus, it's very uncomfortable for you. And I certainly understand that, and I don't mean to minimize it. But we don't want to forget that, in fact, bottom line, our campuses are safe for Jews to attend. Now, the other part of this, of course, is not every Jewish kid has to go to Harvard. And there are lots of wonderful schools out there that are trying very hard to create a sense of safety and security and welcome for Jewish students that we ought to start taking a look at. Mark Charendorf from the Maimonides Fund said, we should identify a minion of schools that Jews should then start to support with their resources and I think that that's true. I would not abandon the traditional Ivies. I think they have tremendous depth and they have wonderful faculty and they do great research. But we can spread our net more widely. And I think that that's not a bad thing to do. And then lastly, I just want to echo what both Julie and Sharon, and I know you would say, which is people's attitude toward you as a Jew is not dependent on your action as a Jew. It's the haters hate because haters hate, not because Jews misbehave. So be proud and be strong. Celebrate your Judaism and get as many high school kids to Israel as possible. So by the time they go to college, they know Israel is not what they're hearing Israel is.
Thank you, David. I was thinking about that. We're getting a lot of great questions from the audience, and I'm just kind of putting them together. But given the idea that, haters are going to hate, and it's not about our Jewish behavior that is causing these problems, but we've seen this over and over again in vulnerable communities, including ours. There's still a special burden on us. Would you agree to initiate these coalition building, allyship building, talking about the DEI framework, looking at the work that you're doing, David, with using Jonathan Haidt's
Right.
material. I couldn't agree more. I think he's just a profound scholar who should be lifted up even more. Do you think, and whether it's fair or not, and this is partially coming from the audience, but do you think it's fair or not? Do you think we should own it or push it away, the special burden of this fight?
Completely. Let me tell you something that I did with a Platt, not Julie Platt, but her son Jonah Platt. Although I suppose it's not entirely unrelated to the fact that Julie is so important at the University of Pennsylvania, but I'm an alumni, Jonah's an alumni, and the other night, just a couple nights ago, we were at Penn doing a Black-Jewish dialogue. And I think it was incredibly important and impactful. And we heard that from both the Jewish and the Black students and faculty who were there, and also community leaders. And we had as you know, we had this wonderful service where T.D. Jakes, who is probably the country's most prominent Black preacher and certainly a remarkable speaker and preacher, where along with Van Jones from CNN and Sheryl Sandberg, we created this service and he prayed for us. And that was enormously powerful and important. And these kinds of alliances are part of what makes America different from other places. It's not like there used to be Russians and Jews and Germans and Jews and Iranians and Jews. There aren't Americans and Jews. There are lots of shifting alliances, and we should be reaching out, trying to make more friends, both by being friends and also by accepting friendship. Because as I often say, Jews are much better at identifying our enemies than we are at embracing our friends. And this is a good time to start embracing some friends.
And you think, though, that we have if they're not seeking us out, we should take on the burden of seeking them out?
Absolutely.
Julie, Sharon, I see you both nodding. Do you want to add a piece?
I mean, we don't have a choice. It would be a luxury to think we have a choice. We have no choice. We need to find our allies wherever they are and be the proactive ones. It would be lovely to think that that wasn't necessary, but it is. So in every place we can, and in every avenue we can, I know my synagogue, Sinai Temple, does this all the time, Rabbi Wolpe's synagogue, reaching out to our ally communities. We're good at it, and we literally have no choice.
Hmm.
And I would add, Noah, that, if I learned anything from 5 years of working at ADL, coalition work is critical, and we don't have the luxury of giving it up. And I think the broader societal lessons are important here, that if we are fighting hate, extremism, prejudice, we have to find common ground with other vulnerable communities who are also fighting the same things. We are fighting for our democracy, for the very character of our society. And so if we feel alone in that, then we're not going to get anywhere. We have to find that common ground with other groups, whether it's a Latino community. Some of the most important work I did at ADL was helping the Mexican American community here, who was really under attack by the rhetoric around, Mexicans coming in here, and educating, Mexican embassies and their consulates about extremism and about what targeting of vulnerable groups coming into America, immigrants, will do. This is an experience that we know a lot about as Jews coming here. So I think those are important tools. We shouldn't give them up. I think October 7th was a bit of it was a heartbreaking moment because so many did speak up for us. So many coalition people, partners we had worked with and built relationships, we did not speak up for us. And that's heartbreaking, and I understand that, and I get it. But we don't, as Julie said, we don't have the luxury of giving it up, and we have to look for allies and others who really understand the threat to our broader society, the illiberalism that's behind of so much of the hate that we're experiencing as Jews. It is illiberalism, it is extremism, it is hate that will go across and not only target Jews.
And after all, Noah, this is the work you did before you came to Federation. I mean, this was like, you've been doing this for many, many, many years. Mm-hmm. So I think that we all feel that this is a moment when we just expand that.
Yeah, thank you for that. Just to give you an example, it's been a personal passion of mine, but Federation's really embraced this. February 7th, we're actually hosting a summit for heads of school, DEI officers at the high school level here at the
Mhm.
Federation, because we need to engage them, and we don't want to just sit outside and protest against them. Destroying their framework is not gonna, in my opinion, is not going to move the ball forward. We want to actually invite them into our framework, and the gift of open democracy is that there's very little coercion, especially here in Los Angeles. We're not built that way. It's all about persuasion, and we have to invite people into our space. And I do think Jews have a special burden, just like every minority, vulnerable community. It's on us, and it shouldn't be. It doesn't feel fair, but that's the way it is. We have to do the heavy lifting, and because of the support of the Federation and the support of the work that all of you are doing, we're able to do that. And this is not the end of the conversation. It's just the beginning of the conversation. This is a long-term shift that we have to engage in, which
Yeah.
means that we can't expect quick answers, but we should be able to figure out how we can build the allies for systemic change down the road. I want to thank all of you for this conversation this morning, joining us from all over the world. Dr. Nashara Nazarian, who is a professor, a lecturer at UCLA, and runs the Nazarian Foundation, to Julie Platt, who serves on the board of directors of Penn and is the chair of JFNA, and to Rabbi David Wolpe, who's currently serving as a visiting scholar at Harvard, as well as at the Maimonides Fund, and continues to serve at Sinai Temple as the emeritus rabbi there. All friends of us and friends of the Jewish community. Thank you so much. Joe, back to you. You're muted, Joe.
Thank you so much for this enlightening conversation today. Really appreciate everyone's thoughts and shedding light on a very important issue. We hope that you can join us next session, February 21st at 9:30, to address From Crisis to Hope, the refugee story and our Jewish advocacy responsibility. With hopes for peace, wishing everyone a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you all.